Uh, Anyway, thank you to everyone for being here. Thank you to my partner/opponent for representing the opposite side, letting us teach you how to debate. Thank you to the judges for taking their time to be here. I have 3 advantages, which you should have known was coming. 3 advantages here, as well as top of case. So you want to take out 4 sheets of paper normally. All right, here we go. The resolution today is that the United States federal government should take steps to significantly reduce carbon emissions in the U.S. The United States federal government here is, as commonly understood, President, Congress, all of those fun branches of government. Steps here means a move, act, or proceeding as towards some end. That's from dictionary.com. Significantly here means large enough to be noticed or have an effect, and that's from the more reputable Merriam-Webster. Criteria here is net benefits, which we will realize through a cost-benefit analysis. Here the government aims to show that the pros outweigh any possible harms that we could have from this plan. Without further ado, let's get into the plan. United States federal government, USFG, through an act of Congress signed by the President, implements a cap and trade system for carbon emissions, the proceeds from which are invested in infrastructure. I will repeat that again for anyone who is struggling to write this down. USFG, through Act of Congress, signed by the President, implements a cap and trade system on carbon emissions, the proceeds of which are reinvested in infrastructure. Advantage 1, environment. In the status quo here, the U.S. has warmed by 1.3 degrees Fahrenheit since 1880. Natural disasters are becoming more commonplace, which, with Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Ike, etc., etc. We have anthropogenic climate change is accepted in almost a unanimous way by climate scientists. And finally, carbon emissions, with the environment being a public good, are usually overproduced. That is, firms have an externality problem that they do not bear the cost of increasing carbon production. Link here under Advantage 1, the environment, is that the plan passes. The United States federal government has cap and trade system for carbon. Internal link here, A, carbon emissions are cut significantly in the first year to fall in line with the cap. B, thereafter the cap is lowered sporadically to account for changing environment as the United States federal government sees fit. C, companies which cannot adapt from their current emissions level will pay either the government or companies which are under their emissions level for the ability to produce these tax credits. Impacts here, A, companies emit less CO2, that is, less carbon dioxide will be in the atmosphere. B, pollution is halted, slowed, or diminished altogether. C, global warming is slowed and halted, returning our climate to what it was just before. D, environment is around for children to enjoy, that is, we are no longer destroying it by overproducing carbon here. E, we don't burn to a fiery crisp by continuing to increase our temperature without any sort of check on it whatsoever. F, again, children get to enjoy the planet, which is a very good thing.
Point of information, when does the cap and trade come into play?
The next starting calendar year. Revenue. Advantage 2, revenue. Sorry, I should have said Advantage 2 first. Status quo here. The government currently runs in the neighborhood of $1 trillion deficits each year. Subpoint 2, interest payments here are crowding out smart spending such as investments, such as spending on infrastructure, etc. Subpoint 3, most U.S. spending is on autopilot. That is, it is mandatory spending as a result of Social Security, Medicaid, etc. Link here is that the plan passes, we have the cap and trade system, etc. Internal link here is that the plan raises revenue for both the government and economically efficient businesses as they sell credits to businesses which cannot adapt as quickly. B, energy efficient companies are rewarded for their investments with more money from selling off their pollution credits. And C, the government gets more tax revenue. Impacts here. Category A of the impacts is that the government deficit shrinks because it is bringing in more money. This means that interest payments go down as we are able to bring in more money and pay the debt down. The debt itself is able to decrease from the additional monies collected. Faith in the dollar goes up, meaning people are more willing to loan money to the federal government, meaning that we avoid default, which would be catastrophic, which also feeds into the current plan, the current track that we're on, B, Efficient businesses are richer. They have more money for investment. This means that they will be producing better, cleaner technologies, and this means that they will be creating more and more sustainable jobs. Burning through this. Advantage 3, infrastructure spending. In the status quo, the U.S. infrastructure system is terrible. It's at risk. The U.S. dams received a D grade in the Congress report on infrastructure, and the average age of dams is 52 years old. In addition, some pipelines that are currently in use for transporting oil are from the 1880s, far older than you or I. Inland waterways have 51 million trips on them each year, and there's an average of 52 interruptions per day. That is, canals and rivers that are used to ship cargo for businesses. In addition, there are 240,000 water main breaks per year, and all of this information is from the Fiscal Times. It's actually the same article. The link here is that the plan passes, the government gets more money from infrastructure, they are able to raise this. The government reinvests this money, as the plan tells them to, in infrastructure. Internal link here, you can flow the internal links over from Advantage 2. Government gets more funding, which it reinvests in infrastructure. There is a more efficient infrastructure, which means less time idling for boats and trucks and other methods of shipment. There are fewer breaks in dams, in roads, and there are fewer breakdowns of the transportation system. Jobs are, in addition, created fixing the broken infrastructure here. Impacts here, A, flow all of the impacts from Advantage 1 from the government saving for the environment. B, here, bridges and roads are safer. There aren't as many accidents. There aren't as many losses of life. Lives are protected. C, better infrastructure means more economic transactions. This means that businesses produce more. This means that GDP goes up, which means that the quality of life goes up, which means that people live longer, are happier, healthier, and more productive. It is for all these reasons outlined in the 3 advantages that the government strongly urges a pro-ballot.
Again, thanks everyone for being here today, to our judges, to my opponent for coming up with this topic yesterday and not cluing me in until early this afternoon. And then of course to all of you
yesterday. That might be a point of personal privilege.
Yeah, but you didn't tell me what you were going to do.
All right, continue.
Just now. All right. So thanks to all of you for being here and being interested in part of it. So I'm going to go off case first. I'll have 2 disadvantages, and then I'll get back on case if I have time. So let's begin. So I'm going to agree with everything Michael said and emphasize that the plan will come into effect in the beginning of January 2015 as far as top of the case. I'll disagree in other places. So again, the plan comes into effect January 2015, just a few short months away. So first disadvantage is going to be an economics disadvantage. The uniqueness here is that we're still coming out of the recession. We haven't quite come up to our historical GDP levels with respect to potential GDP, which means that there's still a lot of growth to be had. Unemployment is still relatively high, especially considering that unemployment is only counting the people who are currently looking for work. So there's still a very large pool of people who are out of work and can't afford a surge in prices. That'll be good to know, or note later on. And then another aspect of uniqueness that I'll bring up later on is the simple fact that 80% of startup companies fail in the first 5 years. And that's due to a number of reasons, one of those being increasing costs of doing business. So the link here is that the plan passes and is enacted in January 2015. Therefore, all of these companies, both existing giants like General Electric and also manufacturing giants, as well as newly created startup companies, all have to comply with cap and trade beginning in January 2015. The brink here is that ultimately this is going to lead to economic disaster, because what cap and trade ultimately does is it increases prices to consumers. So as it becomes, Michael talks about these externalities that are going unpaid by businesses. Well, they're going unpaid by everyone. Businesses release the carbon because it's the most efficient thing for them to do. It's the most efficient thing for them to do right now, and so they're able to charge lower prices to consumers. If they have to make a massive turnaround in their manufacturing equipment, or they have to pay massive amounts of taxes in order to purchase the ability to release these emissions, what that's going to do is that's going to create an incredibly rapid, an incredibly large spike in the prices of consumer goods, especially manufactured goods, and goods that require the emissions of carbon. So basically anything that's plastic, anything that's steel, anything that involves other precious metals, anything that needs to be transported, the price will go up. And so go quickly to the impacts here. The impacts is that ultimately this is going to lead to a recession greater than the financial crisis of 2008. Because of such a sharp increase in prices and no quick way out of the increase in prices, it's not the financial sector that's going to be hit, it's the everyday consumers that are going to be hit. It's the millions of people who aren't counted in the unemployment surveys, but also don't have the income in order to support themselves, especially with these increase in prices. And so what this is going to do is it's going to result in an increase in poverty. It's going to result in an increase in poverty as people are unable to pay their electric bills. They're unable to go out and buy their everyday necessities because the prices have increased. Ultimately, it's going to result in joblessness. I'll go back and I'll mention the turns on his advantages. Because with people have less buying power, they're going to purchase less. That means the companies are going to have less revenue. And so they're not going to be able to hire people to create all of these jobs that my opponent mentioned would be created. And so ultimately this is going to lead to economic destruction, hunger everywhere, because people aren't able to afford the basic needs. With increases in poverty also results in increases in crime, theft, murder rates, and the like. So, that's all for disadvantage 1. Disadvantage 2 is going to be called innovation. As I mentioned previously, the uniqueness, 80% of startup companies fail. The biggest reason that they fail is an inability to acquire the proper amount of capital in order to continue operations. So the link here is that, let's see, I don't remember the statistic for the amount of innovation that startup companies offer, to the general economy. The link here is that the plan passes and there are many barriers to entry to startup companies, both from purchasing the raw materials that they need, especially in the manufacturing sector, but all across the board, because they're not going to be able to afford them. So the brink here is that innovation is going to be stifled. Again, many of these startup companies won't be able to come to fruition. So, say this happened back in the 80s, Microsoft wouldn't exist, Apple wouldn't exist. Our lives today wouldn't be anywhere near what they are now, because these companies that had to start in their infancy and then were able to grow wouldn't have been able to afford it. And so extrapolating that into the future, the new innovations of today and tomorrow that could revolutionize our lives could try to solve things like world hunger, could try to solve for increased emissions in the future. They wouldn't be able to exist because they wouldn't be able to make it out of the startup phase. So the impacts here is, again, linking back to my economic disadvantage. We are going to ultimately cripple our economy both now and in the future because we're stifling innovations, especially from these new startup companies. We're going to be setting ourselves back decades. I have to end that and get to on-case arguments. So starting with advantage 1, the environment. All right. So starting with Michael's internal link, point A, emissions are cut in the first year. Yes, emissions are going to be cut rather drastically in the first year, but that's only because companies aren't going to be able to afford to produce the amount that they no longer need. So flow across everything I said in disadvantage 1, economics to this, or to counter this internal link. And so yes, the carbon emissions are going to be reduced, but that's going to be counteracted in magnitude by the loss of jobs, the increase in poverty rate, the increase in crime rates. That's going to result because of these higher prices. Let's see. That's all I have to say at the moment for Advantage 1. Advantage 2, revenue. So again, going to the internal links, revenue to government and efficient businesses from purchasing the ability to release these carbon emissions. Yeah, I know what. So again, although it will result in an increase in revenue, it won't be a substantial increase in revenue because of the resulting hit to the U.S. economy. And so it's like saying, let's increase the tax base, but let's also not allow people to work in order to pay those taxes. And so ultimately what's going to happen is Michael won't be able to realize any of the impacts that he laid out in Advantage 2 because the revenue simply won't be there because of the reduction of the economy that I mentioned in my Disadvantage 1. He doesn't get any of the revenue from this tax and therefore none of the impacts. And Advantage 3, infrastructure, again, flow across everything that I said on Advantage 2 and also in my economics advantage. You don't get any of the infrastructure benefits if there's no money to fund the increase in infrastructure. So for all these reasons, I urge an opt ballot.